Hello and welcome, I'm Oles Gerjuk and you're watching Head to Head with UATV. Hybrid war and next-generation propaganda are among the most important challenges facing the world today. Ukraine has been at the cutting edge of these challenges since Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea and the war in Donbas. Despite all the odds, Ukrainian society has been learning how to confront Kremlin propaganda. To discuss Ukraine's strategy to tackle this issue, we welcome to the studio Emine Dzhaparova, First Deputy Minister of Information Policy of Ukraine. Hello and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for welcoming me here.
Yes, it's always a pleasure to have you here. So let's look back at 2018. I would like to hear your assessment of the situation with countering Russian disinformation. What strategy has Ukraine been following throughout this year?
Thank you for your question, and it is always my pleasure to be here. Well, let's first compare the information spaces that we have here in Ukraine and there in Russia. So they are very different, and of course we do not have to copy the strategy of Russian Federation that invests billions of dollars into controlling the media space, into controlling journalist media, and using hybrid warfare. So this means that democratic instruments is being actively used against democratic regimes. And by being a democratic state, in case of Ukraine, it is the situation which is the most challenging, means that democratic states are the most fragile in terms of hybrid threats. And of course, for us, it's always about the main issue is balancing between freedom of speech, freedom of media, freedoms, and security issues. Because of course, whenever it goes to the Russian Federation case, look, unfortunately, they don't have any freedom of media.
Yes.
They have to cooperate with the security services, otherwise they would be deprived of licenses or would be suppressed, oppressed, persecuted, in terms of journalism.
Yes.
So unfortunately,
all types of repressions, unfortunately.
Yeah, and unfortunately, this is the situation when, of course, it may give the flavor of being a strong propaganda machine. But this is only a short-term glance, because if we consider the option of copying this experience in a long term, it would lead to the absence of any critical thinking. What I believe is that this is the most significant crime towards own citizens that the Russian regime of Putin has been committing towards Russians, average people who've been zombified, brainwashed every day by tons of fake news, by tons of hate speech, by tons of manipulations, where Ukraine is a failed state, where Ukraine is being perceived as the Nazi state, and many other narratives that is being actively proliferated among average Russian people.
Let's not even remind about journalism ethics, because it just doesn't exist.
Sometimes when our custody services they deport Russian journalists, or security services have the decision of deporting Russian journalists, it's only because these journalists may not be considered as journalists, because the pieces of news or reportages that they are coming up with are far away of being being in consequence with any standards. So what I mean by having other strategies is, of course, first to remain freedom of speech, to remain democratic values, because this is something. If we see the bigger picture behind of the war, it's not only about the physical war in Donbas or the consequences of the occupation of Crimea, it's also about the identity that has been actively forming in Ukraine. And this identity is based on this very high value of freedom. So by answering your question, what is the strategy of Ukraine, is, of course, in the doctrine of information security that we adopted a year ago, even more. It's about the shaping of strategic communication systems. So this is the only democratic instrument on how to deal with the hybrid threats by at the same time saving these very values of freedom. So it's about crisis communications, it's about governmental communications, it's about one voice policy that has been now building up. But what I really want our viewers to know, that this is the process. It can't be the issue within days or months. It is the culture, it is the process, it is the dialogue, it is new social agreements between all the members of the society, subjects of the society. So it's about having this very culture of strategic communications. Another very important documents that we have adopted are two strategies of information reintegration of both Donbas and Crimea. The recent one at the very last session of the government, of the Cabinet of Ministers, was the Crimean strategy of information reintegration. So it's mostly about making or coming up with a system. It is first the signal to the occupied Crimea that Ukraine has been actively fighting for Crimea, because from another hand, the propaganda has been trying to convince people not only all over the world, but also those Ukrainians living on the occupied territories that
Ukraine
they have to
have
to reconcile with the Russian reality, that they have to live in peace and thinking that there would not be any future but for Russia. So this strategy is about saying and clearly positioning, saying that Ukraine has been actively fighting for Crimea. This is the sovereign territory of Crimea. The citizens of Ukraine in Crimea are the hostages of the occupation. They remain the citizens for the Ukrainian state, and the Ukrainian state would do everything possible to facilitate, to ease the, let's say, the procedure of adopting Ukrainian documents and other things that is about physical connection with the state, right? Passports and many things. It's also about the campaigns that we have. So it's about keeping Crimea on the agenda of international relations and information space. It's about consolidating Ukrainian public opinion about why should we fight for Crimea, and it's also about informing those who are living behind the occupation, let's say the Ukrainians on the occupied territories, on what kind of services and what is the policy of Ukraine.
This is what I wanted to ask, this last thing that you mentioned, the informational coverage of these occupied territories. How can we cover them? Because I do know that there is almost no signal in Crimea or in Donbas.
This is also another myth, because first, there is a satellite option. So approximately 70% of the Crimean population potentially have an access to the Ukrainian media. This is the first thing. It's about satellite. The second issue is about, yes, of course, the very first consequence of the occupation was the cut off of the Ukrainian signal. So in March 2014, the occupants started to control the TV towers, transmitters and frequencies. And now what they do, they have been using Ukrainian TV and radio frequencies, which are, by the way, are the property of Ukraine. And this is a very illegal action. It's about using 503 TV and radio frequencies, and they broadcast propaganda on Ukrainian frequencies. So, of course, from our hand, we established and launched the special commission on the restoration of the Ukrainian signal on the occupied territories within the Ministry of Information Policy. It also includes other actors like National Council on TV and Radio Broadcasting, the Ministry on Occupied Territories, and many others. So, and within this, let's say, 3 years, we have managed to build up several TV towers. One in Hirnik, in Donbas, on the east of the territory.
We're talking about the areas that are controlled, government-controlled by Ukraine.
Yes, of course. Okay. The TV tower may be constructed only on the controlled territory, but it may bring the signal to the non-controlled territory. This is the case. So in Hirnik, in Bakhmutivka, Luhanska Oblast, in Karachun, and on the border with Crimea, in Kherson, in Chonhar. So we also have some plans to construct several other TV towers. And of course, we also have managed to launch the draft law, to adopt the draft law together with the committee, the Verkhovna Rada Committee on the Information Policy and Freedom of Media, the very special procedure of issuing the licenses for the broadcasting. Because previously it might took, let's say, years to have the very physical possibility to broadcast in Ukraine. Now,
you mean to go through this verification and authorization process, and then to get this permission?
Through different bodies, governmental bodies. And now, because of the law that we have managed to adopt, it's about the most easy way to get and the most short way to get these licenses. So it may, de facto, it may take only approximately a month or even a bit more. So it really makes it much more easier.
And we're talking about the regional media outlets, right?
I mean, it doesn't matter what kind of media outlets may submit their documents for getting this license. These are both regional or local or national. So we have now on the border with occupied territories, we have several options, but with the satellite. So these are the digital broadcasting, TV broadcasting, analog. We didn't switch off the analog signal for the occupied territories, and we have FM radio broadcasting, and we have AM. AM covers, the whole territory of occupied the whole occupied territories up to the very border with Russia, in even some Russian states like Rostov cities, I mean.
Do we have any rates? How many people are interested in
It's not possible to calculate that.
It is not possible.
Whenever it's about occupied territories, you can't do this.
Okay. Can people that are residing on these occupied territories, can they be tracked, traced, and noticed that they watch Ukrainian media?
Yes, I know that we have the monitoring mission that brings the information from another, let's say, site of the occupation, saying that, of course, people are so scared that they even are scared to put their antennas, because, of course, it's possible to define whether people are watching Ukrainian media or local propaganda media or Russian media whenever it's about antennas, yeah? So it's about huge level of fear. But of course, still we have to understand that there is still satellite broadcasting, that of course people, it's also about the choice. You may go to the shop, you have so many options of, let's say, chocolate, and you choose one of the chocolate pieces, right, or bars. So it's the same with media. People potentially, the majority of the Ukrainian citizens, they have an access for the Ukrainian media, but it's another thing whether they choose to watch Ukrainian media.
I understand. It is very actually interesting that American experts are calling Russian operations in Ukraine and this hybrid war a new 21st century form of conflict, fifth generation warfare. How would you decrypt this new term?
Absolutely, I do agree, because whenever, let's say, when we see what is being committed on the occupied territories, it's about shaping new identities. We had these several researchers on the occupied territories, let's say underground researchers, that showed us that the occupying authorities, backed by Russia, have been actively investing money into shaping this identity of the so-called citizens of DNR, LNR, and the several percentage of the Ukrainian citizens tend to think that they are the citizens of DNR, LNR. Same with Crimea. So it's really one of the most important cases that the dynamics of the processes are that high. We're living in the so-called snapshot world, meaning that everything is that fast, that people don't have time to go into the depth of the processes. That
they don't have time to think?
That we tend to perceive the day according to the headlines, right? We have new norms. And whenever it's about the war, unfortunately, it's also about statistics. It's about people's life. But for people that receive every day the statistics about people's death, it's about new norm. It's about normalization of the war. And these are the most important challenges. Of course, another issue is the social media. We have managed to contact with the authority, with the administration of the Facebook, because the Facebook is the most popular social media in Ukraine, especially after the restriction of the Russian-backed media, social media like Одноклассники, ВКонтакте. The numbers show that more than 15 or 25% of Ukrainians, I don't remember the exact number. It's also about the verification, because what we believe that Facebook, bots and trolls have been used for the fake news dissemination, yeah? And of course, it's about verification. So we had, just for the recent year, we have verified 120 profiles and accounts of the body of different governmental institutions and politicians, so that the Ukrainians could know that this or that page is about official information.
So these pages,
verified.
They are being verified by Facebook. Okay, this is good. Well, apart from the countering Russian aggression, it is also very important to promote Ukraine worldwide. And it is very interesting what image of Ukraine is the Ministry of Information Policy working on to popularize?
Yeah, perhaps the culmination, let's say, of the work that we've been elaborated for recent year was the May 2018, when the government adopted officially for the first time in the Ukrainian history the official brand of Ukraine. So now it's about Ukraine Now. It's about showing Ukraine as the country of possibilities, as the country of transformation, that is been now changing, reshaping, transforming. It's about, let's say, trying to get investments in Ukraine. It's about tourism. It's about visiting Ukraine, that it's also a beautiful country. We produce a lot of different content about Ukraine. One of the tracks is about European integration. Just a year ago, we started the beginning of the campaign in terms of the European integration was Visit Ukraine. We had broadcasted 3 video clips from Lviv, Kyiv, and Dnipro, the beautiful cities, on Euronews, showing that these are the very European cities, actually, and the slogan was Visit Ukraine. The second part of this European integration campaign was about raising the consciousness of Ukrainians, saying that Ukraine starts with you. So saying that, yes, of course, we do love to travel Europe. We do love to be fascinated by the cities and cleans of the European cities, by the culture of communication between people, by the high education standards, by standards of life. And the campaign is also, it was about 3 video clips that we produced with the prominent Ukrainian singers, famous Ukrainian singers, and for them it was the social project. They didn't get any coin or they didn't receive money for that, and I do thankful for them. So we would try to show very average, very, let's say, kitchen level episodes showing that that Europe starts with you. Let's say if you go to the picnic, if you travel with your friends, please take your garbage with you. Don't throw it in the forest or the nearest place that you can find. If you buy a luxury European car, and we all like to drive these beautiful cars, you can't throw the cup from your coffee out of the window. Or if you travel, or if you go for, let's say, to walk with your puppy or puppet, you have to cleanse after your doggy, right? It's about this very
being well-behaved and respectful to others and to your environment,
absolutely.
to your state.
Yeah, it's about showing that we have to, because we can't, we can dream of Europe, but if we won't start with ourselves, we will never build up Europe here in Ukraine. So it's about making Europe happen here in Ukraine.
Well, thank you so much for this meaningful answer. And unfortunately, we ran out of time. So that's why I would like to ask the last questions about the plans for the upcoming year.
Well, the upcoming year will be much more tough because we had the budget cut, so it's 3 times less than we used to have in 2018. Speaking about the priorities, they would not be changed. So these are the information security, these are the reintegration of occupied territories, this is about popularization of Ukraine abroad, and it's about the, let's say, promotion of Ukraine in every single aspect, starting from the war that we have, and of course it's about finding the proper language, because of course always crying and saying that we have a lot of people dying in the war, it's not always the best instrument to speak worldwide, because people, the world is not circling around exclusively Ukraine. So it's also about finding language of culture, language of different festivals, by showing films that we produce, so many things, and also ending up with this very, let's say, celebrations of different national historical days.
Well, thank you so much for this contribution to countering the Russian aggression. Thank you for being a guest today in our studio.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Yes, thank you. That was Emine Dzhaparova, First Deputy Minister of Information Policy of Ukraine. Thank you for watching Head to Head. I'm Oles Gerjuk. Goodbye.